I crumpled the letter and tossed it toward the trash can by the curb. The paper folded and landed there like something from another life. For a moment I kept walking, keys in my hand, ready to close the door on whatever memory the envelope held. Then I stopped. I turned back, dug the letter out of the can, smoothed the creases with 2 patient fingers, and slid it into my purse. Not because I planned to answer. Not because I wanted to reopen old wounds. I did it because some small, stubborn part of me wanted proof. Proof that the past still fit in my hands if I needed it to. Maybe it was a strange kind of comfort, like keeping an old photograph in the bottom drawer. Proof that we had come this far. Johnny was in his 2nd year of college, majoring in engineering. He had a scholarship that paid most of the bills. He called every Sunday. We spoke about homework, a new professor, a girl in his calculus group, things that felt safe. Those calls were small, steady beacons in my week. I worked overtime at the insurance office where I had been employed for a decade. The work was ordinary and honest. It paid the bills. It kept my hands busy, so the rest of me would not ruminate. For years I had told myself that building a steady life was better than looking back. The past, I believed, could rot in silence so long as the present was clean. Still, the letter unsettled me. I carried it in my purse for 3 days. I would take it out when I was alone and read 1 line, maybe 2, then put it back and tell myself not to act on whatever strange impulse it stirred. On the 4th day, I dialed the number scrawled across the envelope. First Baptist Church answered. Pastor Wilson's voice was quiet and steady. I told him my name. I told him I had written about my father. He thanked me for calling back and then, with a softness I did not expect, said the kind of words that make the world tilt. Your father is very ill. The doctors do not expect him to last the week. He has been asking for you. For a long time I had imagined never going back. I had left Willow Creek with nothing but the clothes on my back and a small, stubborn hope I could keep my son safe. When people left that town, they tried to forget it like a bruise. They moved far enough away so the smell of the fields could not reach them. I had pretended the past was only a place I had visited in memory, not a place that could ever find me again. The call from Pastor Wilson proved that was a lie. That night I checked into a shabby motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, and the room smelled faintly of coffee and old smoke. The mattress sagged, and the thin walls did not quite muffle the hum of the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed with the letter in my lap, the streetlight painting long bars across the carpet. The paper felt heavier now that I had spoken to someone about it. I called Johnny from the motel, because I could not bear to worry him with the truth. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice a comfort. We spoke about his classes and a project he was excited about. I lied. I said everything was fine. I did not tell him about the hospital. I told myself I was protecting him. The secret, I thought, belonged to me alone. Sleep did not come. The ceiling fan moved a slow, steady rhythm above me. Rain began softly, then heavier, an old, persistent sound that reminded me of a night years ago I tried never to think about. For a long time, I had believed that fleeing was the only way to keep a good life for Johnny. I had left with him a small, ragged bundle and a new name I used like armor. In a new city, with different people, the stories about who I had been did not follow me. I taught myself to answer questions with the smooth, uncomplicated lie of a widow whose husband had died overseas. People accepted it because they wanted to believe a clean, simple story. But the past has a way of finding the small cracks in your armor. The next morning, I drove to the hospital and parked under a gray, hungry sky. The smell at County General was antiseptic and coffee, the same both everywhere. I walked strange paths in the corridors, the kind you only take when you mean to find something you are afraid to meet. The room was dim. His body lay smaller than the man I remembered. Machines made tiny, patient sounds. For a moment I thought he was gone, and relief rushed through me like cold water. Then his lids fluttered, and his blue eyes, stubborn as ever, found mine. His voice was a thin thread. Maria, he whispered. Words after so long felt brittle. I sat down, not too close, but close enough to listen. He spoke in short bursts, in the halting way of someone who had used up his strength. He told me of drinking and moving and not staying anywhere long. He spoke of selling the farm, and of memories he could not face. Then, with effort that sounded like confession, he said something I had known for years but had never wanted said aloud. "The boy is mine. I'm his father." Even if I had known, hearing the words in that room made the past take shape like a hand reaching out. He reached toward the nightstand and pushed a small envelope toward me. Inside, he had left papers, a deed, some bank statements, a thin sum of money. "Restitution," he said, naming what he thought would matter. I slid the envelope into my purse without opening it. I did not want to speak to him of money. I did not want his apologies. I wanted him to be quiet. I wanted to be done. But I also wanted to understand why, after so many years, he had chosen to reach across the gulf between us. I left the hospital that day with the letter still in my purse, and with a feeling I could not name. It was not grief. It was not relief. It was a small, heavy knot of possibility. For 3 days I carried that paper close. I read a line and folded it back in without letting the thought of action form. Then, on the 4th day, when the world felt a little less sharp, I took the letter out and thought about my son. The secret had protected him all his life. Now it sat between us like a stone. Why did Maria keep one small thing tucked in her purse for 3 days? That little paper would change everything. The letter had no return address. Just my name in a shaky hand and a phone number scrawled across the top. At first I thought it might be from someone who remembered me from Willow Creek. An old neighbor, maybe, or someone who still kept the farm in mind. I almost left it in the trash. Instead, I smoothed it in my hand like something fragile and read it again. There was only a single line inside, a short formal note asking me to call. The handwriting matched the number. I sat for a long time on the edge of the sink in the small bathroom of my duplex and stared at the paper, as if it might change into something kinder if I blinked hard enough. I had not wanted the past to speak. For 20 years I had watched its speech through a thick glass, muffled, distant. When it knocked, I had always turned away. I had made a life carefully, like setting stones across a stream so the water could not touch the soles of my feet. But stones move when the river shifts. The letter felt like a tremor under my carefully placed steps. I called the number. A voice answered with the calm, patient tone of someone used to holding other people's hard news. "First Baptist Church, Pastor Wilson speaking," he said. He sounded older than I remembered. He sounded kindly. I caught myself saying my name before I could think better of it. "Miss Miller," he said after a moment. "Thank you for calling me back." He didn't hurry. His words came slow and careful, like someone who knew how to hold a thin thing without tearing it. He told me my father was very ill. He told me the doctors did not expect him to last the week. Those words landed in me the way cold water does when you have been standing in warm sun. They shocked, yes, but they also brought up a strange, unmourned relief. The farm I had left at 15, the barn, the fields, the small house, was still a place where memory laid traps. I had fled because the house was not safe. I had left because the only people there who were supposed to protect me did not. For 2 decades I had convinced myself that leaving had been enough to keep the story from swallowing everything else. He told me my father had been asking for me. Insistently, Pastor Wilson said, his voice small with effort. I listened and felt an old hurt begin to stir, the one I had smothered under other work and other names. Why would he ask for me now after all these years? Why would a man who had made himself small in so many ways suddenly want my presence at his deathbed? The pastor hesitated, and then said something that made me take a step back. A grandson, he said the name was Johnny. For a sliver of time I thought of nothing but the soft brown eyes of my son, and the clean life I'd tried so hard to build for him. "Will he be coming?" the pastor asked. I said no. I lied like a reflex. Johnny knew nothing. That lie felt like a small lock I could click into place to keep one world separate from the other. I booked a motel room on the edge of town. The place was the kind of motel that seems to hold its breath between one kind of life and another. A flickering neon sign, stale coffee in the lobby, and rooms that smelled faintly of other people's journeys. The mattress sagged where someone else's weight had once settled. I sat with the letter and the number and the quiet thought that everything that had been true of me in Willow Creek could still be true if I let it be. Driving to the hospital the next morning, the rain began, soft and steady. The world outside the windshield blurred into a watercolor of gray. County General had the same small-town stubbornness. Linoleum floors, a coffee machine that refused to warm to anything but cold, nurses who moved like they had learned the job by watching the world pass in and out the front doors. The nurse at the desk recognized me. I must have looked like the kind of person who carries the town in their face. "Mr. Miller had a rough night," she said. Her voice was gentle in the sterile corridor. "The doctor says it won't be long." She didn't pry. The way she set the words down let them do their work and roll away. When I walked into the room, the machines kept time like a small, indifferent choir. My father looked smaller than I remembered, skin thin over bone. The face I had known turned into something fragile. He opened his eyes, and for a moment they held the same hard, familiar blue. He said my name, and even that small sound felt like an old hinge finally moved. He did not have much strength. Each word came slow and sharp. At times he looked like a man who had been scraped smooth by a life that weathered him down. Then, in fits of lucidity, he confessed fragments, about selling the farm, about moving from place to place, about drinking. The confessions were not wholly of remorse. They were thin, raw things that scrabbled at the truth. He reached for the drawer beside the bed and pushed toward me an envelope. Papers. A deed. Some bank statements. He told me in a husky voice that he had put the land in my name years ago and had been paying taxes. He called what was inside the envelope restitution. His hand trembled as he spoke the word. I slid the envelope into my purse without looking. Money could not fix the shape of things that had been done. It could not rewrite a past. Still, there was a strange practical logic in the gesture. A man trying to leave something that looked like repair. That night I lay awake in the motel thinking of the voice on the phone and the nurse at the hospital and the look in my father's tired eyes. The letter that had first come sliding across my kitchen threshold felt less like an accident and more like a summons. Someone had pushed on the loose thread of my life and waited to see if I would pull. Who sent the letter? And why would a dying man suddenly ask for her after 20 years? The motel room was smaller than it looked from the road. A single lamp threw a tired circle of light across the bed. Outside the window, the neon sign stuttered like someone coughing. I sat on the edge of the mattress with the letter folded in my hands and tried to breathe in a rhythm that would keep me from thinking too fast. I called Johnny because it felt like the only safe thing to do. His voice on the other end of the line was a warm, ordinary sound. The voice that had kept me steady for 22 years. He was halfway through a homework problem and described a professor who gave too much homework and a classmate who drank too much coffee. I let him talk. I wanted to keep my voice steady for him, to give him the small Sunday normal things that made him feel at home even when I was somewhere else. When he asked if I was okay, I lied. "Just tired," I said. "Long day at work." It was a good, clean lie. It kept his worries small. I told him the thing every mother says when a child worries, and it felt for a moment like armor. I told him to focus on school and that I'd see him soon. We hung up and the quiet of the motel room pressed back in, heavier than before. Lying was its own muscle. I had been practicing it since I was a child. It had kept me safe in small ways and in terrible ones. When people asked why I never married, why my son had no father's story, why I left town at 15, I learned to give them an answer that fit. A soldier, I would say. He died in Vietnam. It was tidy. It filled the space with a story people could hold easily without prying. The horse story came later. a stranger lie that stuck when I needed it most. But right then, in that motel, the small lie to Johnny felt like betrayal and kindness at the same time. I thought about driving home. I thought of slipping back into the tidy routine where bills waited and the insurance office smelled of photocopies and coffee. I thought about the life I had built where no one knew the name of the town I had fled, but the letter burned in my purse like a live coal. It had the power to pull up old dirt no matter how carefully I had smoothed the kitchen floor. So why was I going to the hospital? I told myself a handful of reasons. To see for myself that he was truly dying. To watch him die so I could finally know what was true without hearsay. To take whatever he left and close the account. To say nothing and be a witness. To look him in the face as an adult and show him that his little girl had not been defeated. Each reason was part of a different kind of courage or cowardice. Old habits arrived with me like an old coat. When fear came, I folded it away and put on busyness. I told myself I would be practical at the hospital. I would not forgive him. I would not let him touch what I had built. I would take the papers and leave. That was a plan that sounded safe in the light of day, but plans change in the dimness of a room with rain at the window. When I sat down in the gray morning to drive, small images came that had nothing to do with logic. I thought of the barn, of the way the horse Blackie pushed his nose into my hand. I thought of the smell of hay and the single lamp my mother used to keep lit. I thought of how strange it was that a memory that once meant danger could also be the one soft thing someone had given me. I kept telling myself I would not speak much. I would sit in the chair and listen. I would let the pastor and the nurses explain what needed explaining. I would be a sensible woman who kept the line between then and now sharp and clear. Driving through rain to a dying man's bedside felt like a test, but I also felt the pull of something else. Curiosity. Not the small curiosity about what the envelope might contain, but a larger curiosity about the man who had shaped me into the person I was. People change or they don't. Sometimes remorse arrives like a late passenger on a train. I wanted to see whether remorse had come, whether those last words I imagined in 100 different ways might be different when spoken by a man who smelled of hospital soap and old whiskey. There was another thought I did not say out loud to myself until I had already checked into the motel. I wanted to see the truth. Not the tidy story I had told Johnny, not the gossip that had burned through Willow Creek, not the wild, cruel rumor about a horse. The truth, whatever shape it took, had the power to change what I carried inside me. If I could hold the truth, then maybe I could decide what to do with it. So I made my small plan and tucked it under the next, on the list of things I did automatically. Pack a bag. Call no one. Tell Johnny only that I was tired. Drive through the rain without stopping for the real past to catch me by surprise. She called her son and lied, but what did she really plan to do at the hospital? County General smells like the same small-town hospital smell everywhere. Bleach, old coffee, and the faint trace of floral air freshener someone keeps dumping into the vents. The nurse at the desk looked at me like she had already read my name on a clipboard, and the rest was only details. Room 12, she said, and pushed a small plastic card into my hand. I walked down the corridor, and the sound of my shoes seemed too loud for the quiet the building held. The room was dim, like a stage between acts. Machines blinked and sighed. The bed sat low and too small for the weight of the history that lived on it. For a moment I thought he might already be gone. Relief flared, and then quickly cooled into something else, like watching a storm pass and realizing you had stood in it with only a thin coat. His face was thinner than memory. Time had worn him down in ways only years of small cruelties and poor choices can do. Hollows at the temples, skin paper thin over bone, the blue of his eyes more faded than I remembered. But the eyes were the same. They found me with a slow, stubborn focus that felt like being read aloud. "Maria," he whispered. The single word hit a shape in my chest I had learned to make small and manageable, until now. I sat in the empty chair by the bed and felt 30 years collapse into one room. He breathed shallowly, each inhalation a quiet labor. Machines marked the seconds between the sounds like a careful, indifferent metronome. He spoke in pieces, like a music box whose tune had been knocked out of order. He told me he had sold the farm. He told me he had been drinking most of the time since my mother died. He said little things that did not need saying and left out the ones that did. I watched his mouth form words and chose which ones to let touch me and which to let fall away like dust. There was a pastor in the corner, a steady presence who let silence do much of the work for him. He sat like someone who has held other people's endings and learned that quiet was often the only respectful thing to offer. A nurse came and smoothed the sheet and adjusted a monitor like someone making sure a map stays accurate. Around me, ordinary people did small, ordinary tasks that somehow made the extraordinary feel less sharp. At one point, he smiled in a way that belonged to a different man, not the one who had hurt me. It was a small thing, and I felt something like pity, a soft, sudden softening I did not expect. It wasn't pity for the man he had been so much as pity for the tired shell he had become. Pity is a small thing. It does not repair or forgive. It only notices. We did not speak much at first. I listened to the fragments, the excuses, the small confessions that felt like leaves blown toward me in a strong wind. He coughed and apologized for being a poor speaker. He tried to say more than his breath would let him. When he reached for the drawer beside the bed and pushed an envelope toward me with fingers that shook, I felt all the different stories of our lives thrum in that small motion. The pastor left the room for a moment, as if letting us have the space to do whatever the two of us might do with a final hour. I sat forward and took the envelope without opening it. Inside, I knew, were papers, legal papers, a deed, perhaps a small sum of money. Practical things for a life I did not want to rebuild around him. He looked at me then with a sharp intensity that made the room hold its breath. His voice came out on a thread. "People talked about you after you left," he said. Said terrible things. My face stayed still. I had lived with that shadow for years, had learned how to let it pass over me without breaking. He said he had let the other story be easier than the truth. He said he had been sorry in a way that sounded like a new thing coming alive inside him. The confession started to unspool in the hush between his breaths. He told me he'd been thinking of me and the boy. He wanted me to know he'd thought of us every day. He wanted to put something in my name before he died. He wanted, he murmured, to speak something true before the end. When the words began to lay themselves out, small, halting pieces that pretended not to be a reckoning, I braced like someone waiting for an impact. I had rehearsed this meeting in different ways 1,000 times. Anger, silence, a door slammed, a legal fight, walking away. None of those rehearsals matched the thinness of the voice in the room. The way the man who had hurt me was now the same man asking, with the last of his strength, to be heard. He leaned forward as if gathering from some last reserve, and then, very slowly, his lids lifted. His eyes opened. The room felt suddenly too small for what was about to follow. When his eyes opened, he said one sentence that shattered the silence. She already knew it, but why did hearing it feel different? He reached for the drawer with a slow, deliberate motion, as if the act of handing something over might steady whatever would follow. His fingers trembled, not with anger, but with the fatigue of a man who had burned his life down to ash and was now trying, clumsily, to gather embers. He pushed the envelope toward me across the small table and watched my face like a man who had rehearsed his last scene 1,000 times. Inside the envelope, unmistakable even through the thin paper, were the kinds of things that try to make endings tidy. Legal papers, a deed with my name scrawled on the top in shaky ink, bank statements folded together, and a letter. He watched me take it with a look that mixed relief and fear. It was as if the act of giving away what little he had left gave him permission to let go. "Put it in your name," he said, voice rasping. "Been paying taxes on it for years." The words were practical. Their sound was like someone flinging a rope toward a shore. Restitution, he called it. A word that weighed like a coin in his mouth. I slid the envelope into my purse without opening it. Not because I believed the papers would fix anything, but because opening felt like starting a negotiation I was not ready to have. Money and land could not patch the shape of the past. They could not smooth the scar where a life had been cut. Still, the envelope felt heavy in my bag, the weight of an old house and an older apology. He tried to speak then, to reach into the pile of years and pull out some explanation that might make sense now. A confession spilled out in ragged pieces, not polished or full, but honest in its own small, late way. He told me about the farm sold years ago. He said he had been drinking. He told me of moving place to place, of nothing sticking, of a life that had been one bad decision after another. It sounded like the truncated memoir of a man who had finally been exhausted into truth. "You were always the best of me," he muttered unexpectedly, the words a strange and ill-fitting praise. I listened because I had to, because somebody needed to hear what he had to say before the curtain fell. But the praise landed oddly, like a gift wrapped in sand. He said he had no excuse. He said he did not expect forgiveness. He said he wanted me to have what he had left. He tried, in the way dying men sometimes try, to exchange guilt for something tangible. An account balance, a scribbled deed, a name on a page. He wanted to give me a choice disguised as charity. When the pastor left the room, I sat with the envelope in my lap and felt the old things come up like tidewater. I thought about the barn we'd had, about the day I'd buried Blackie with my own hands, the horse who had been the only steady thing in a dangerous house. Blackie had been a witness in the way animals bear witness, without words, without judgment, steady and present. I thought about the rumor that had once spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, that I had a child by a horse. The lie had been monstrous, and it had stuck because people wanted a story that kept the unthinkable sealed away. My father had let the lie live because it was easier than facing what he had done. I had rehearsed 100 ways to handle that envelope. Walk out without it, take it and throw it away, open it and confront him, use it to secure a legal fight. Each option felt righteous for a moment and cowardly in another. In the end, practicality overruled drama. I put it away, because the fight I needed was not with him in that bed. It was with the facts the paper represented, and that fight would need daylight and a lawyer's office and a cool head. He coughed and said something about being tired, and for a second the man inside the husk looked like the person he had been before the cruelty, before the drinking. His face softened. It was small and not nearly enough, but it was something that would, later, make the choice to open the envelope less about resentment and more about responsibility. I thought of Johnny, his steady voice on the phone, the engineer who liked coffee too strong in a certain bookstore downtown. The paper in my purse had the power to alter Johnny's life in a practical way. That was an idea that shifted me from anger to calculation. For his future, the money could mean opportunity. For my peace, the deed could mean closure. I left the hospital carrying both the memory of his whispering guilt and the envelope he had pushed across the table. The rain had stopped, and a thin gray sun tried to break through the clouds as if the world wanted to promise something like normal. I checked into the motel and sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope heavier now because the choice it demanded sat in my hands and refused to be easy. In the quiet of the room, with the neon sign stuttering in the distance, I finally allowed myself to imagine opening the letter. What would his words say beyond the clumsy apology he'd offered from his bed? Would they be a plea, a confession, a map to a truth I had been too frightened to hold? Or would they be another attempt at smoothing the past with money and land? He handed her an envelope. It wasn't money, or was it? What was inside would force a choice she never wanted. That night in the motel, I finally opened the envelope. The room smelled of stale coffee, and the neon sign hummed outside the window. I sat at the little desk, turned the lamp on, and let the paper fall open like a small, slow confession. The letter was written in a shaky hand. My name at the top, a few short sentences, and then the kind of clumsy honesty you get from a man who has run out of ways to hide. He wrote that by the time I read the note he would be gone. He guessed correctly that my first thought would be anger or laughter. He said, "Good riddance," and then, almost as if remembering himself, he apologized. The apology was simple. "What I did to you was unforgivable," he wrote. "I know that. I have known it every day since you left." He did not try to excuse himself with neat reasons. Instead, he named the truth in small, blunt words. The drinking, the selfishness, the shame. He called himself broken in ways he could not repair. Reading it, I felt the odd double pull of revulsion and something like pity. The man who could have been my father's defender, the one who had let an impossible lie spread through Willow Creek, was now asking for nothing more than the mercy of being understood. He kept saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. He kept saying he hoped I might one day let go of the hate, not for him, he insisted, but for my own weight. Then he wrote about the boy. He said he had wondered if the child looked like him. He said he had hoped fiercely that the boy took after me. He told me he'd thought of us every day, imagined us living other lives, and tried to measure the distance between what he had been and what he might have been. The voice in his handwriting wobbled between shame and something like regret. He said he had put the land in my name years ago and had been paying the taxes. He called the money and the deed not payment, and then immediately tried to make them sound like something practical. A small help, a way to compensate for the years he could not give. "Nothing will ever be enough," he wrote, "but it's all I have left." There was a line that stopped me cold. It was the part where he spoke plainly, without hiding behind the old defenses he'd used in town. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I don't deserve it. But I hope someday you can let go of the hate. You were always the best of me, Maria, the only good thing I ever did." That line was both unbearable and strange. It felt like a hand reaching from under a pile of debris and offering a damp, dirty coin. I folded the paper back and read it again, as if the sentence might change if I looked long enough. The man who had made my childhood a map of fear now called me the best of him. It was not a bomb, it was a riddle. I put the letter back in the envelope and stared at the ceiling until the neon sign outside winked out and sleep pushed against my eyelids. I thought of Johnny's face, brown eyes like his mother's, steady and curious. The idea of something practical, money or land, helping his future made a cold sort of logic take root inside me. I had never wanted anything from that man. I had not wanted his pity, his apologies, or his stories. But I had a son who might benefit from what he left. An education fund, a safer future, an option I had not had when I was his age. The letter did not soothe. It did not undo the townspeople's gossip or the rumor that had followed me, that I had a child with a horse. The horse story had been a lie I told to protect something too rotten to be faced. People had chosen the easier lie. My father had encouraged it because to admit the truth would have exposed a darker shame. Reading his words now, I understood something else. He had spent his life hiding from what he had done, and then hiding behind a different lie that spared the town's image more than it did our pain. Still, there was an honesty in that shaky script that a bedside whisper had not had. On the paper he could say things he could not in speech. He could sign his name without flinching. He could leave what he had in a way that made choices possible. I thought of what to do with it. I thought of taking the deed to a lawyer the next day. I thought of sending the money to a small trust for Johnny. I thought of burning the papers on the motel's small balcony like a ritual of finality. Each choice felt like a moral map, leading in a different direction. When I slid the paper back into the envelope, I felt lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because words on a page had a tidy honesty I could hold. Heavier because the page had widened the fault line in my life. The truth on paper did not make living with the past easier. It only made the decision about what to do with what he left more urgent. I slept poorly. Dawn came thin and gray through the curtains. I packed the envelope into my purse again, not for greed, but because practical things needed practical answers, and because a small part of me still wanted to know whether the final thing he left was a genuine attempt at repair, or something meant only to buy peace. The letter admitted things, but did it ask for forgiveness, or only try to buy peace? The words inside would undo more than they mended. After the motel and the hospital and the letter, I came home with the envelope still folded into my purse, and a strange hollow feeling where certainty used to sit. For days I did the small, ordinary things that kept our life in neat rows: pay the bills, water the plants, answer the same phone calls at the insurance office. At night the secret hummed in my head like a loose wire. I thought about telling Johnny right away. I thought about slipping the papers across the table and letting the facts fall where they might. I thought about calling him into the kitchen and saying, "Sit down. There is something I must tell you." I imagined his face in that instant. The confusion, the hurt, the way a life can tilt in a single sentence. I also imagined the worst. Him walking out, not returning. The two of us pulled apart like torn fabric. The more I pictured it, the more I saw the blunt edges waiting for both of us. Then I thought about years. 22 of them. Years of birthdays, of parent-teacher nights, of Sunday phone calls. He had built a life on the story I had given him. A soldier who died in a far-off war, a tidy myth that let other people stop asking. I had given him a father who was easy to believe. Maybe I had done that for him. Or maybe I had done it for myself, to keep the world simple. Either way, the truth I kept now had a weight that felt like it could crush more than it could free. So I chose a moment, his birthday weekend. It was selfish in some ways and generous in others. Selfish because I wanted him present when I said it. I wanted to see his face, to hold his hands if he needed them. Generous because birthdays still felt like a gentle, protected time, a place where love was easier to find. I told myself the day would give him space to breathe, and me the chance to be calm. The weeks before it were busy in the way ordinary life can be busy when a storm sits just beyond the horizon. I cleaned the house until the counters shone. I bought ingredients for his favorite beef stew and French toast. I wrapped textbooks he'd asked for, and a new calculator. Each small domestic task steadied me. Each mundane chore was a rope I held to keep from falling into panic. I practiced different ways to say it. In the bathroom mirror, I tried to make my voice even. "Johnny," I would say, "there is something you need to know about your father." No, too blunt. I tried softer. "There are things I have kept from you because I wanted to protect you." That sounded better, but still like a prelude to loss. Words changed with each practice until they meant less than I hoped. The truth was not a speech. It was a map of wounds. No matter how carefully I folded it, edges would cut. When he arrived that Friday evening, the house smelled like cinnamon and bacon. He stepped in with that tall, easy stride of his and hugged me the way he always had. For a moment before the weight in my chest remembered itself, everything felt like it used to. We ate. We laughed about old small things. We walked to the bookstore like we had when he was a child, and still believed I could fix anything. All the while, I held the envelope in the drawer of my bedside table. I picked it up, smoothed it with an index finger, put it back. I pretended to be ordinary because that is the language I knew best. I wanted to keep a corner of his world bright and unblemished until the moment I chose to break the glass. Saturday we did simple, familiar things. Breakfast at the diner that made the best pancakes, a slow movie, walking the small park near the old library. Each moment was an anchor, each laugh a small proof that he had grown into someone whole. I kept measuring the time between laughs and the words I had to say. I told myself if he saw me through an ordinary weekend, he might not feel like the world had tilted wholly off its axis. On Sunday morning, when sunlight came soft through the kitchen windows, I made the French toast he loved. I wrapped his remaining gifts with trembling hands. When the plates were cleared and the wrapping paper lay in small piles on the floor, the moment felt right. I put the envelope on the table beside the textbooks and took my seat across from him. "Johnny," I began, and my voice almost failed. He looked up, patient and open. He had never been cruel. He had only ever been steady. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, the practiced words liquefying into the truth. I told him about the phone call from the pastor, about the hospital, about the envelope. I told him I had gone not to reconnect, but to see, to know. My mouth moved. The story tumbled out in fits and starts. I told him the soldier story was not true. I told him I had kept a lie because I thought it was safer for him. His eyes changed in a way that made me ache. Not angry, at least not yet, but unraveling. He asked quiet questions. I tried to answer, to choose the words that would hurt least. Then the hardest thing. I said the words I had kept for 22 years. "Your father is my father," I said. And in that single sentence, a whole map of our lives rearranged itself. For a moment, the room held its breath. He was still. He looked as if a curtain had been pulled back, and he saw a stage he had not expected to find. I waited for the storm. She decided to tell Johnny on his birthday. But what if the truth destroys him? Would honesty free them or break them both? The house smelled like cinnamon and butter the whole weekend. Small things can hold a life together. A pot on the stove, the way a chair creaks when someone sits down, a window that opens to a familiar street. When Johnny arrived on Friday evening, he carried a duffel and a tired smile. He hugged me the way he had every time he came home, the same strong arms, the same warm laugh. For a short while, in that hug, I believed everything might stay ordinary. We spent Saturday doing the things we always did when he came home. Pancakes at the diner that still had the same chipped mugs, a slow walk past the bookstore where he liked to browse, a movie that we both pretended not to cry at even though we did. We moved through the day like two people who had practiced being normal for years. Each laugh was small armor against the thing I planned to do. On Saturday night, I wrapped the final gifts, textbooks, a calculator, a sweater that matched his eyes. I put the envelope from the hospital in the drawer of my bedside table. Each time my fingers brushed it, I felt a tremor in my chest. I told myself to wait, to give him a day that was his, not one marked by the weight of my history. Sunday came clear and bright. The light in the kitchen made the maple table look almost new. I made French toast with cinnamon the way he liked it, burned the edges just a little because he always preferred it that way. He ate with the slow, contented calm of a man who knows the world is mostly okay. I watched him and felt a mix of wonder and terror. Wonder at the good person he had become, and terror at the thought that my words could change him. We cleared the plates and sat with coffee cooling in our hands. The house hummed softly with ordinary sounds. The refrigerator, distant traffic, birds in the maple tree. It was the kind of quiet that makes you notice a moment sitting between two people like a third presence. I reached into the drawer and took the envelope out, the paper crinkling like a small animal in my palm. "Johnny," I said, and even now the memory of the way his head tilted toward me is sharp. He looked up, and there was nothing in his face but patience and a slow, steady trust. I felt suddenly greedy for that look. It had kept me honest in ways nothing else could. I started carefully. I told him about the phone call from Pastor Wilson. I told him the hospital name. I told him I had gone to see a man who had asked for me. I told him about the envelope, and I put it on the table like a thing that belonged to both of us. My voice did not shake much, but my hands did. I thought practice would make the words feel easier. It did not. He listened without interrupting. His face folded into concentration, as if he were trying to solve a problem in his head as calmly as he might solve an engineering equation. Quiet is a kind of strength. He had it in a way most men of his age did not. I thought about how hard I had worked to give him a life where he could be that calm. I told him about the soldier story, the lie I had told him for as long as he could remember. I told him I had made it up because the truth had been too terrible, too private, too dangerous to carry into his life. He blinked, not with anger, but with the slow process of letting a new fact rearrange the furniture of what he already believed. Then, in the way a river reaches a bend and changes course, I said the thing that had been lodged in me for 22 years. I said it as plainly as I could, because plainness felt kinder than drama. "Your father is my father," I told him. For a long beat, nothing happened. The air held its breath. He put down his cup very carefully, fingers steady. The look on his face was not immediately anger. It was more like someone noticing for the first time that the floor had tilted just enough to make walking different. He asked questions, the small ones first. Where, when, why. I answered the pieces I could. I told him about the farm, about the barn, about the night I had been 15 and everything changed. I told him I had left to keep him safe, that I had made a tidy story because the other truth would have been impossible for a child. I told him about Blackie, the horse I had buried with my own hands, and how people had believed the lie about a horse, rather than face what the truth really meant. At first he was quiet, listening, taking each line in like a slow, clinical read. Then his face shifted through a spectrum of things. Shock, confusion, a flash of sorrow, and then a steadiness I did not understand at first. He stood up and began to pace, hands in his pockets, the way people do when they are sorting out a new map in their heads. I watched him move and realized that the person before me was both my son and a stranger I had never met. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally, not with accusation so much as puzzlement. I tried to answer. I told him I had been young, scared, and desperate. I told him I had wanted him to have something clean and uncomplicated in a world that had been messy. I told him I had thought I was protecting him. He went silent again. Then, in a voice that was low and careful, he said, "I need time." The room contracted in a small, immediate grief. I had expected that reaction. I had prepared for it. But the feeling of it was sharper than my rehearsals had allowed. He packed a bag later that day and said he would head back to campus early. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to beg him to stay. I let him go because the last thing I wanted to do was chain him to a truth he had not asked for. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table and thought of a dozen ways this could end. All of them. Worse than the small peace I felt when the house finally went quiet. Everything looked normal, until the moment she spoke. What she said would change how he saw himself forever. When the words left my mouth, slow, plain, without flourish, the room changed. Saying, "Your father is my father," felt like setting down a heavy object I had carried for years. The sound of it was not loud. It was small, ordinary, like the clink of a cup on a saucer. But in that small sound, everything shifted. Johnny sat very still. For a moment, I thought he might laugh it off, or ask some flippant question to keep the moment from breaking. He did neither. Instead, he listened the way he always had when a problem needed solving. Quietly, with his mind working behind his eyes. He had the habit of measuring things like an engineer, like someone sorting parts by weight and fit. I wanted that steady logic to help him now. I told him more. I told him about Willow Creek and the farmhouse, about the barn, and the night the storm came. I told him how I had been 15 and frightened, how I had left because I could not stay. I told him about Blackie, the horse who was my only comfort for a time, and how people had believed a strange lie rather than look at the truth. I tried not to say things that would make him see images he did not need. I kept it factual, blunt, and as gentle as I could. He asked questions that were small and practical at first. Where did this happen? When did you leave? Why didn't you tell me? I answered them the best I could. When he asked the hard ones, did he hurt you? Was I safe? The room changed color. Those were the moments I had kept hidden for 2 decades. Moments I had learned to carry by myself. Saying them aloud felt like opening a door I had locked. At one point he sat back and covered his face with both hands. I had seen him tired and stressed before, but this was different. Some part of his map had been ripped, and he was trying to refold it in his hands. He paced. He asked if anyone else knew. I told him no one. I had made the soldier story because it was cleaner. People accepted it. And Willow Creek had its own strange ways of swallowing things whole rather than confronting them. When he heard that part, the lie about the horse, his face changed again. He blinked, incredulous. You told them that? He whispered, not a question so much as a shock. I told him the truth. I was 15, afraid, and I needed something the town could believe. My father had chosen to let the rumor spread, because it was easier for him to hide behind a different kind of shame than his own guilt. The air in the living room felt thin. He moved from anger to confusion to sorrow in small increments. He did not yell. He did not slam doors. He simply needed distance to think, which is why he packed a bag and left that afternoon to return to campus early. Watching him drive away with the taillights shrinking down the street felt like watching a chapter close. In a book you were only halfway through reading, spent those next 3 days waiting, calling once and leaving a message that I hoped. Felt calm and not pleading. The not knowing gnawed at me. Each hour stretched thin. I feared I had lost him forever. I imagined a dozen endings, and none were comfortable. Then, on the 4th day, his car was in the drive. He walked in carrying a stack of papers and a steadier look than the one he'd had that first night. He had been quiet because he needed to learn, to know. The stack he set on the coffee table was full of printouts, medical articles, notes from forums, a pamphlet from the university's health center. He had been researching, not to punish me, but to understand what this might mean for him, and for any future he might have. He did not start with blame. He started with practical questions, genetic risks, how to seek counseling, what doctors to call. The engineering in him wanted data. The son in him wanted safety. I answered what I could and said I would go with him to any appointment he wanted. We spoke, then listened. We did not fix everything that night. Nothing so large can be fixed in one conversation. But a bridge began to form. Small planks of honesty and listening laid between us. He hugged me before he left, briefly and strong. I need time, he said, and I understood. He needed to hold himself together in his own way. He promised to call. He did. As I watched him go, I thought about how truth can do odd things. It can wound, yes. It can also free. The revealing had not destroyed him. It had rearranged him. He was still Johnny, kind, thoughtful, steady, and the knowledge of where he came from had not erased that. He heard the impossible. His father was also her father. How do you feel when the past becomes your origin story? After Johnny left that first time, the house felt too quiet. The clock on the mantel seemed louder. I answered the phone with a voice I hoped sounded steady, but most of my calls went unanswered. For 3 days he did not reply. Each hour felt like a small stone dropped into a dark well. I tried not to imagine the worst, but my mind kept finding the sharp edges of everything I had said. On the 4th day, his car pulled into the driveway again. He walked in carrying a stack of papers, a notebook, and a calm I had not expected. He put the pile on the coffee table and sat down without a show, as if he had simply returned from class. His hands were steady, but his eyes held a new, careful focus. He had been quiet because he had been working. He told me what he'd done. He had read medical articles. He had printed pamphlets from the University Health Center. He had bookmarked pages about genetic counseling. He had spoken, briefly, to a genetic counselor over the phone and planned an appointment. His voice was practical. like the voice of someone who wanted concrete information more than sympathy. "You disappeared for 3 days," I said, and he gave a small, tired smile. "I needed to know," he said simply. "I needed to know what this means. For me, for the future, for any children I might have one day." When he said it out loud, the words landed like a bell in the room. He was thinking forward in ways I had done my best to avoid. We went through the papers together. He highlighted phrases he wanted me to read. He circled terms and underlined sections on risk and testing. He kept pausing to translate clinical language into plain speech. "Some risks are higher than average. There are extra screenings and monitoring available. Modern medicine can manage many problems, and counselors can help families plan." He told me what the counselor had said on the phone, that there is no single answer, only options and more information. I watched him as he read. He wanted facts. Facts felt safer than mystery. He told me he had emailed a list of questions to a genetic counselor at the university clinic and had an appointment next week. He had also found forums and support groups where people shared experiences, honest, raw, reassuring in the way strangers can be when they speak without judgment. There were quieter things too. He had called an old friend and spoken awkwardly about family history. He had sat in his car and cried once, he admitted, because the news had unsettled him more than he expected. He kept saying, "I'm okay," but each time the phrase had a new fragility. We talked about what we might do. He asked about tests that could help determine specific risks. He asked how much it would matter to his day-to-day life. He asked what it might mean for a future partner. These were not frivolous questions. They were careful, responsible questions about a life he might one day build. I answered as best as I could, admitting what I didn't know. "We'll go together," I said. "We'll get the facts. If anything needs to be done, we'll do it together." He nodded, and for the first time since the reveal, I felt like we were a team of two people trying to solve a hard problem in the way he would approach a tricky engineering project. Gather data, consult an expert, plan the next step. Yet under the practical talk was a quiet human fear, not only about health but about identity. How much of a person is shaped by the story they come from? How much would this change how he saw himself? We had moved from secret to truth, but the truth came with new choices and new responsibilities. He spread the papers on the table and then closed the notebook, looking up at me with a face that was tired but resolved. "I found some things," he said slowly, "and I have a question. It's the one question no one wanted to ask. What did he discover?" When Johnny spread the papers out on the coffee table, something about the way he did it felt adult and calm. He had the look of someone who had read the problem, measured the pieces, and was ready to act. That steadiness was the same trait that had always made me proud of him. He faced hard things with facts first, feelings after. Tonight, though, the facts were only the start. He looked up from the stack and met my eyes. "I could walk away," he said quietly, not as a threat, but as a recognition of the choice he had. "I could decide none of this is my life and never come back." It landed like a small, sharp thing between us. The room was suddenly full of possibility and loss at once. I braced for the pain I had rehearsed for every night. I thought of the scene where he slammed the door, the frame breaking like old wood. I thought of him calling to say he wanted nothing more to do with me. I thought of the empty chair at the table and how the house would feel too big and too quiet without his steady presence. Instead, he did something I did not expect. He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm and sure. "I've been angry," he said, "at him, about what he did to you. But I've also been thinking, I've been learning. I don't want to let where I came from decide who I'll be." His voice trembled on the last line, but his eyes were steady. He had seen the medical notes, the counselor's brochure, the risk percentages. He knew there were things to consider, but he also knew one important truth. The facts did not change that he was him. He was still the son I had raised, kind, patient, and brave enough to stay and find out. He told me what surprised him most. That the thing he feared, the idea that his origin would define him, felt less certain after reading and talking. Knowledge, he said, made the unknown smaller. It didn't erase history, but it made choices clearer. He wanted to plan, not panic. He wanted to meet the future with a map, not a blank stare. We made an appointment at the university clinic. We arranged to speak to a genetic counselor together. He wanted to be thorough. He wanted to know what monitoring might be needed, the options if he ever decided to have children, and how to support a partner through that conversation. Each of those steps felt like building a ladder together, rung by rung, back toward a life that could be lived without hiding. One evening, after a long meeting and a quiet dinner, he surprised me again. He handed the envelope back to me, the deed and the bank statements, which I had long considered a thing to either accept or reject on principle. He did not ask for the money. Instead, he told me he wanted me to use it for myself. Buy the trip, he said simply. You always talked about the ocean. Take the money and go. Use it for something you want, not because it's from him, but because you deserve it. His words made a small, unexpected laugh bubble out of me. For years I had considered the deed as an ugly remnant. He saw it differently, as the last practical thing his grandfather left that could be turned into something kind. We began to stitch new rhythms into our days. Small things first, more honest phone calls, longer visits, an anchored honesty that did not demand too much or too little. He started bringing home articles and asking about my childhood in ways that were curious but not accusing. I told him more than I had planned to, including how Blackie had been my comfort in a dark time, and how burying that horse had been one of the last kinder acts I remembered. Counseling helped. The genetic counselor explained things in patient, plain language. Test options were laid out, with their limits and their strengths. We learned there would be choices to make, screenings in pregnancy, early testing options, ways to monitor fetal development. There were no irrevocable sentences, only paths and decisions. Knowing that made the future less frightening and more manageable. Outside those practical steps, the deepest work happened in quiet moments. He would stand in the doorway and ask if I was okay. I would tell him sometimes I was tired, and he would make coffee and sit with me. We learned to be honest about fear without letting it dominate us. The silent parts between our words became shorter as trust rebuilt itself in small, steady acts. When summer came, I took his advice. I booked a ticket to the ocean. The first morning on the shore felt strange and bright. The horizon looked endless in a way that made old things small. Standing ankle-deep in the surf, I felt a looseness I had not known in years. It was not a complete healing. It was not forgiveness written like a clean sheet. It was a daily, practical kind of freedom, waking without the weight of a secret ready to fall. He could have walked away. Instead, he made one choice that surprised her more than any secret ever could. Why did he stay? The ticket felt small and brave in my hand. I had bought it with a mixture of caution and a kind of hungry hope I had not let myself feel in years. The ocean was a place I had talked about as a dream, a wide, open thing that did not ask questions and did not keep score. Standing on the shore that first morning, the sand cool under my feet, I felt the world breathe in a new rhythm. Waves came and went in patient rhythms, like a clock that measured life by tides instead of minutes. I walked where the salt water licked my ankles and watched shells polished into tiny moons by the motion of the sea. The horizon held no past. It was just sky meeting water, plain and vast. The feeling that rose inside me was not a loud joy. It was quieter, a careful loosening, as if some heavy knot in my chest had been nudged and was slowly giving way. I thought of Johnny. I thought of the way he had folded the papers on the coffee table and then taken my hand. I remembered his steady voice, the practical plans, the small kindness that had surprised me more than any apology ever could. We had built new habits, honest calls, visits without the need for careful scripts, appointments kept together. The work of it had not been simple, but it had been real. It had been, in the best way, ordinary. On the sand, I let myself remember the good things too. The friends I had in Nashville, the quiet nights after work, the small celebrations we had not allowed ourselves to skip. I thought of Blackie, and of burying him with hands that shook but were steady enough to do what had to be done. I realized with some odd relief that the horse had been my soft place, not my shame. People had tried to make the worst story into something monstrous and ridiculous. I had worn that lie like armor, until I no longer needed it. The envelope had been handled the right way, with a lawyer, with caution, and a plan. Johnny had insisted I use the money for something that belonged to me, so I did. I walked the beaches, counted shells, and let the small, bright things of the world sink into me. The deed had been sold, the money used in part to make small repairs to the life we already had. A new heater in the winter, a dental bill paid without worry, a few months of a community college class I promised myself I would take. I thought often about forgiveness. It did not come as a dramatic bolt. It came as a series of small releases. The decision not to speak his name in anger every time someone mentioned Willow Creek. The choice not to let the rumor be the thing that defined my son. The moment I could tell Johnny about the barn without collapsing into old fear. Forgiveness, if you could call it that, was more like clearing a path to walk on. It did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing where to set my feet. Sometimes, late at night, memory arrives anyway. A smell of hay. A rainstorm that sounds too much like that one terrible April night. A song on the radio that tilts me toward something I do not want to remember. Those moments still sting. They remind me that healing is not a clean line, but a slow weathering. I stood on the shore longer than I had planned. I let the wind move through my hair and let the idea of a life that belonged to me, not to a rumor, not to a lie, not to a dying man's apology, grow a little steadier inside. I had been brave enough to tell the truth, and brave enough to let the person who mattered most decide what to do with it. We had chosen to face the future together. She stood on the shore and finally let go, but one small secret from Willow Creek still lives in her memory. Will that secret ever truly die?